Welcome back, everyone, for another deep dive. We're cracking open some fascinating stuff today from the 5th century. You know how much we love digging into early church history, and you guys sent in some excerpts from the Epistles and Commentaries by Prosper of Aquitaine, and they're right up our alley, dealing with some pretty intense theological debates.
Oh, absolutely. These letters are like little time capsules giving us a glimpse into a church still grappling with the fallout of the Pelagian controversy and how Augustine's ideas on grace, were being, I guess you could say, reinterpreted.
Okay, so it's like the ink's barely dry on one theological throwdown and another one's already brewing. And this one's even trickier because it's not outright rejection of Augustine. It's more like, oh yeah, we totally agree with him, but then they go and kind of twist the meaning. Sneaky. So who are these semi-Pelagian folks anyway?
Well, they popped up in southern Gaul, and they definitely believed in God's grace being, necessary for salvation. But, and this is a big but, they added this twist. They thought it was the human will that made the first move.
Hold on. So it's like a dance. They both need to dance, but someone's got to make the first move. And they're saying, we take the first step toward God, and then God's like, all right, you want to dance? Here's some grace.
You got it. That's a great analogy. And that was a huge she-be deal because it kind of puts limits on God's grace, doesn't it? It's like he's just waiting for us to make up our minds. And that wasn't exactly what Augustine was saying, was it?
No, not at all.
Sure.
Talk about a theological tango. But did they just come right out and contradict Augustine, or were they being a bit more, shall we say, strategic about it?
Well, they actually tried to use Augustine's earlier writings to back themselves up, especially the stuff he wrote about free will before those Pelagian debates heated up. Remember, Augustine used to be all about human choice in coming to faith. So the semi-Pelagians, they latched onto that.
So they were cherry-picking, trying to find stuff that fit their narrative. Classic.
Exactly. They're saying, look, see, even Augustine agrees with us. But Augustine had, really come a long way in his thinking about grace, which made the semi-Pelagians take, well, kind of problematic.
And this is where Prosper of Aquitaine steps in, right? His letters have this energy to them, this we got to fix this vibe.
Yeah.
So who was Prosper, and why did he feel the need to write to Augustine about all of this?
Picture a really dedicated student who's worried that his teacher's ideas are being, well, messed with. That's Prosper, a lay theologian who was all in on defending Augustine's teachings.
So not just some guy with an opinion, but someone who really knew their stuff.
Exactly. And his letters to Augustine weren't just fan mail. He was genuinely concerned. He saw these semi-Pelagian ideas spreading like wildfire in Gaul, and he was like, Augustine, we need a game plan.
And this isn't just some abstract theological debate, right? We're talking about real people's lives and how they understood their relationship with God. It had real consequences. So what were some of the specific things Prosper was worried about? What were the semi-Pelagians actually saying that was causing such a stir? So the semi-Pelagians, they're out there gaining ground, stirring things up with their unique take on grace and free will. What were their main arguments, and how did Prosper, try to push back against them?
Imagine this. A farmer, right? He's not going to waste his time planting seeds in soil he thinks is totally dead. Well, the semi-Pelagians, they thought God worked the same way with grace. God wouldn't give his grace to someone he knew wouldn't respond to it.
Interesting. So they're basically saying God's grace is on hold until he sees a glimmer of goodness in us first. Like, he's peeking into the future to see who's going to pick him before handing out any grace.
That's a really good way to put it. And that's exactly what Prosper had a problem with. It was like they were putting God in a box, limiting his grace based on our supposed potential. Prosper, he goes straight to the source, to scripture, and starts picking apart their arguments using like real life examples from the Bible.
Okay, now that's what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Real life stuff, not just theological jargon. I love that. Give us an example. Like, how do you use that story about Cornelius the centurion?
Oh, the semi-Pelagians, they love to bring up Cornelius. They thought it was a slam dunk for their side. I mean, here's Cornelius, this devout Gentile, praying to God, doing good deeds, all before he even meets Peter. They're like, see, Cornelius earned God's favor. That's why God sent Peter to him.
Yeah, at first glance, it does seem like they have a point. But I'm guessing Prosper wasn't buying it.
Not a chance. Prosper's like, hold on a minute. He points out that God had already shown Cornelius favor. Remember, God sends Peter a vision telling him to go find Cornelius. Prosper's point is that God had already chosen Cornelius way before any of those good deeds. Those good deeds, they were the result of God's grace, his prevenient grace, working in Cornelius even before he fully got it.
Okay, so it's not Cornelius's actions that get God's attention. It's God's grace working behind the scenes, prepping Cornelius's heart for, like, the big reveal, the gospel message.
Exactly. Prosper is basically saying, you're missing the forest for the trees, guys. They were so focused on Cornelius's actions, they totally missed God's initiative. And that, to Prosper, was a dangerous way to interpret the gospel.
This isn't just an academic debate, is it? This gets into the nitty-gritty of salvation, God's role, and our own free will.
Absolutely. And as we'll see, this seemingly abstract theological debate had some huge implications, especially when you start thinking about those who, can't really take that first step towards God.
It's amazing how these debates from, 1,500 years ago can still hit home today. Grace, free will, God's role.
Yeah.
We're still wrestling with this stuff. And as we dig deeper into Prosper's letters, we see this debate wasn't just theoretical. It had real consequences, especially when you bring in the idea of predestination.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. The semi-Pelagian view, with all its emphasis on us taking the initiative, well, it raised some really tough questions, like what about those who can't even take that first step toward God? Think about infants who die before baptism, or people who, for whatever reason, never got to hear the gospel message. What happens to them?
It's a tough one, right? If it all hinges on us choosing God, what hope is there for those who never even get the chance? How did Prosper tackle that?
Prosper, he's right there with Augustine on this one. They both appeal to the mystery and the utter sovereignty of God's grace. We can't wrap our minds around why God chooses some and not others, but we have to trust his wisdom. We have to trust his heart. Our limited understanding can't box in God's infinite love and power.
So it's less about having all the answers and more about saying, okay, God, I trust you even when it doesn't make sense to me. But the semi-Pelagians, didn't they also worry about what predestination means practically? Like, if God's already decided everything, why bother doing anything? Why evangelize?
Right. They thought it'd lead to a bunch of spiritual couch potatoes. God's got this, I'll just chill here. But Prosper, he flips the script.
Oh, I like where this is going. Tell me more.
He basically says, if we truly believe in God's sovereignty, shouldn't that make us even more fired up to share the gospel? He saw God's sovereignty as the very reason we should be out there doing the work of evangelism.
So it's not one or the other, it's both, right? God chooses who's saved, but he also chooses to use us through sharing the gospel to make it happen.
Exactly. Prosper believed that our efforts, our going out and spreading the good news, weren't contradicting God's plan. They were part of it. We're like instruments in his hands.
That's a powerful way to think about it. Not about sitting back and letting God handle it, but actively joining in on this incredible story of redemption.
And that's the beauty of these letters, They remind us that theology, it's not just some dusty old topic. It's alive, it's relevant, it shapes how we see God, how we see ourselves, and how we interact with the world around us.
Absolutely. Well, folks, we've journeyed back to the 5th century, dug into some spicy theological debates, and wrestled with big questions that are still relevant today. And that's a wrap on this deep dive into the world of Prosper of Aquitaine and the semi-Pelagian controversy. Big thanks to our expert for, being an expert. And to you, our amazing listeners, for joining us. Until next time, keep seeking, keep questioning, and keep exploring this wild and wonderful faith of ours.